Hi. Although this book, The Bell Jar, by Sylvia Plath, is often read by several college students, my class was lucky enough to read it this year. What this book is mainly about is a girl named Esther Greenwood who lives with her parents up until the age of 9. At the age of 9, Esther's father passes away, and she has to live with her mother. 10 years later, at the age of 19, Esther is then transferred to New York City after having won a contest in a magazine. From there, Esther lives with 11 other girls who have also won the same contest. After having lived in New York City for a month, Esther moves back to her hometown, where she is then diagnosed with depression. As the book goes on, you get to read more about Esther's mental illness and how she learns to cope with it. What makes this book so fascinating is that you get to read about the life of a 19-year-old and her journey through life. Some things you get to read about are electroshock therapy and insulin shots. This makes the book very interesting because you get to explore a part of life that a normal 19-year-old wouldn't necessarily experience. Like I said before, the protagonist of the book is Esther Greenwood. Esther is a very smart and intelligent 19-year-old woman who has to go through some very hard things in life. Some of the antagonists of this book, or the minor characters, are Doreen, Buddy Willard, and Joan. Doreen is Esther's friend that she meets in New York. In New York, Esther and Doreen go on several different journeys together. Buddy Willard is Esther's friend who used to go to church with her when they were little. As the book progresses, you get to read about Buddy and how he came to Esther's college to see her. The main reason why he came to Esther's college was to see a girl, Joan. After having read the book for a while, you get to read that Esther learns that Buddy is eventually a hypocrite, and she no longer hangs out with him. The other antagonist of the book is Joan. Joan is the other girl, like I said before, who Esther competes with for Buddy. Joan is a year younger than Esther and is just as smart as her. As the book goes on, you also get to read how Joan starts to commit suicide, just like Esther is beginning to do. The main conflict of the story is that Esther is diagnosed with depression and she doesn't know how to cope with it. So as a result, Esther goes from hospital to hospital trying to cure her disease, her mental illness. The book goes through chronological order in a very weird way. When I say weird way, I mean in a way that I've never read before. This book it'll go from the start of her as a 9-year-old, and it'll go up to a 19-year-old. And then several points throughout the story, the book goes through flashbacks that go back to the time when she was 9 or the time when she was growing up. I've also found this very fascinating. Some of the strengths of this novel are the fact that it's written on a high college level, and that it's very hard vocabulary. I like this part of the book because I get to learn more words than I get to learn some words that I've never even heard before. Some of the weaknesses of this novel are that you get to read some parts that are kind of inappropriate for an 8th grader. Not really inappropriate, but they're hard to kind of understand. In this book, there are several examples of symbolism. Some examples are water and babies. Let me show you an example. It's on page 63. It's about babies. On page 63, while Esther is at the hospital with Buddy, Esther states, "I was quite proud of the calm way I stared at all these gruesome things. The only time I jumped was when I leaned my elbow on Buddy's cadaverous stomach to watch him dissect a lung. After a minute or two, I felt this burning sensation in my elbow, and it occurred to me that the cadaver might just be half alive, since it was still warm. So I leapt off my stool with a small exclamation. Then Buddy explained the burning was only from the pickling fluid, and I sat back in my old position." Another example of symbolism that goes on is about water. I have 2 examples. Let me just get that for you. One's on page 161, and the other's on page 147. On page 147, Esther says, "That morning I had made a start. I had locked myself in the bathroom and run a tub full of warm water and taken out a Gillette blade. When they asked some old Roman philosopher or other how he wanted to die, he said he would open his veins in a warm bath. I thought it would be very easy, lying in the tub and seeing the redness flower from my wrists, flush after flush through the clear water, till I sank to sleep under a surface graudy as poppies." The last example is on page 161. Esther is trying to drown herself in this chapter. Esther says, "I dashed the water from my eyes. I was panting as after a strenuous exertion, but floating without effort. I dived and dived again, and each time popped up like a cork. The gray rock mocked me, bobbing on the water as easy as a life buoy. I knew when I was beaten. I turned back. This is symbolism because it's resembling that Esther somewhat likes water, and that if she had to pick a way to die, it'd be through water. The other symbolism is babies. This is symbolism because Esther says that she likes babies at first, but then after seeing the babies at the hospital, she is glad with the way she looks at them and the way she learns about them. As the book goes on, you get to learn about Esther's mental illness. Esther doesn't think that she's really progressing all that much, but the doctors do. I found this very cool because, or not very cool, but very interesting because Esther doesn't think that she's learning anything at all, and she's experienced mixed emotions, but the doctors do see a progression in her, and that's something that she does not see. That's also another sign of Esther going through her mental illness. As the mental health system appears in the novel, it's a very odd and peculiar way of looking at a health system. Today in modern day, we would never use anything like electroshock therapy and insulin shots, but that is something that Esther has to experience. As painful as it may seem, Esther hates it the first time, but then as she has to go through it more and more, she begins to like it. There are several different settings that occur in the novel. One setting that occurs is in New York City. While in New York City, Esther explores several different parts of her life that she never even knew she could ever meet. Another setting that occurs is Another setting that occurs is at the hospital where Esther stays at. This is a good setting because this is where Esther spends most of the book, and it also talks about where Esther meets Joan and gets to meet her in more depth and gets to learn more about her. The last setting is at Esther's house. Esther doesn't really like her house, but while there, she gets to live with her mother, and she's glad that she hasn't seen her in such a long time. Esther sees a woman's role in society as she looks at it a very odd way. When I say odd way, she looks at it as a peculiar, in an opposite way that I would look at it if I were a girl. One example of this is on page 84. Let me just read this for you. On page 84, Esther says, "This seemed the dreary and wasted life for a girl with 15 years of straight A's, but I knew that's what marriage was like, because cooking and cleaning and washing was just what Buddy Willard's mother did from morning till night, and she was the wife of a university professor and had been a private school teacher herself." I found this part very interesting because if I were a woman, I would look at life the total opposite, and I would look at it as a chance to come home and get to cook and clean in a positive way for a person that you love. Esther does not think she is ready to leave the hospital, but the doctors think she is. On page 204, let me just read you an example. On page 204, the nurse says, "Well, I'm not sure if you're supposed to know yet, but today you're moving to Belsize." The nurse looked at me expectantly. "Belsize," I said. "I can't go there." "Why not?" "I'm not ready. I'm not well enough." "Of course you're well enough. Don't worry. They wouldn't be moving you if you weren't well enough." I like this part of the book. This is one of my favorite parts of the book because although Esther does not think she's progressing through her mental illness, the doctors think she does. And this is, like I stated before. After having read this book, I thought that this book was a very good book to read, and I liked although I didn't like it in the beginning, I began to like it towards the end and how it was tying up, and I just really like this because you get to explore a part of a person's life, like I said before, that you normally not experience. I would definitely recommend this book to several other students because I thought that this was a great book, and I would definitely love to read this book again.